Hello and welcome to a new episode of South Yorkshire Ghost Stories. So I haven't added anything new to this channel for quite a long time now, and that's mainly because I've just been very busy at work. But now that autumn has come around again, Halloween is fast approaching and we're entering into the spooky season once more, I thought that maybe it's time to start adding a few new stories. And I wanted to start with a few stories around a local landmark known as Cannon Hall, which is a place that I visit quite often. And there are many ghost stories associated with Cannon Hall, dating back at least as far as the Victorian period. So this is the hall as it appears today. This is a picture I took just a few days ago. The site is very old. The house that we see today dates back to the 18th century, but this is just the latest incarnation of it. There has been a hall on this site for more than 1,000 years, in fact. And with such a long history, perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that the hall has collected a few ghosts over the years. And as I said, there are many ghost stories associated with this house, and in future videos we'll actually look inside the house itself and talk about some of the ghost stories associated with some of the rooms inside. But today we're looking at a story which takes place outside in the grounds. So around the hall there are extensive lands, and here you can see just a small part of them in this picture. But down here in front of the hall was originally a deer park. So of course in days gone by the aristocracy and gentry, they liked to hunt deer, and they kept deer first of all for the purposes of hunting. But then later on the deer became kind of just more ornamental, but the family continued to keep them hanging around the place for right up until the 20th century, right up until the Second World War in fact. And a few hundred yards down from the house, down the slope from the house, we come across this unusual structure. And people often wonder what it is, what its purpose was. But actually it's a deer shelter. It was built specifically for the deer to escape into, out of, to shelter from bad weather. And it's actually this structure which is associated with perhaps the best known ghost story from Cannon Hall. So our ghost is associated with the deer shed itself, but also with this tree right in front of it. This is, as you can see, this is a mature tree. It's probably been there for at least a good couple of 100 years or so. And it's this tree and the area around it in front of the deer shed which is the main location for our ghost story tonight. Now, I've heard and read several different versions of this story, and doubtless some of them have probably been embellished a bit over the years, but I'll give you the version that I've been told, or actually it's rather more of a slight amalgamation between two or three similar accounts of the same events. So the time period was the late Victorian era. I don't have an exact year, but I believe sometime around the 1880s is when this story takes place. And the house at this time was very much in its heyday. Today it's a museum, but back then it was the residence of the Spencer Stanhope family and their large staff, so numerous servants, as you would expect, for a house of this size and type during that period. Supposedly, the story, the strange events associated with the deer shed began one bleak autumn in the late Victorian period. As the nights started to draw in and the mist came creeping down from the moors, several of the estate workers began whispering of strange occurrences near the deer shed. A chill would descend, even on mild days, a chill would descend around this area. Horses shied away from this spot as though they were in fear of some unseen presence. In fact, not only that, the deer themselves wouldn't go near the shelter. One night, a gamekeeper who was returning from his rounds swore that he had seen a man standing beneath the tree in front of the shelter. This figure was tall and thin, and he was dressed in a long black frock coat. The figure was motionless, its face was pale and indistinct in the dim light, and as the keeper approached, the figure seemed to fade away, to kind of dissolve into the mist. Now the gamekeeper was understandably terrified, and he fled back to the hall, to the warmth and light and safety of the hall, where he was found in the servants' kitchen, shaking and near speechless. And this was just the start, because over the following weeks more sightings were reported. So a kitchen maid who was out walking with a lantern at twilight claimed that the figure had passed silently in front of her, leaving a faint scent of smoke. And a gardener said that he saw a man in old-fashioned dress from the earlier part of the century kneeling by the deer shed, as though he was searching for something lost in the long grass. And there were many other reported sightings over the space of a few weeks, but each account was similar. The same tall, frock-coated apparition, always appearing beneath the same tree, and always near the deer shed. So the story eventually reached the ears of the local vicar, the vicar of Cawthorne, which is the village next to the estate. The vicar was called the Reverend Charles Tippledy Pratt, which is a name which probably sounds a bit comical, but according to my research, this actually really was his name. And he was, in fact, a learned and dignified man who was known for his calm and rational demeanour. And he was sceptical about this ghost story at first, but he agreed to investigate. So in November of that year, he visited the hall, accompanied by 2 parishioners from the church and the butler from the hall, and together they walked to the deer shed at dusk. Now, according to the vicar's own account, which was apparently was preserved in fragments of a parish journal, I've not had a sight of this document myself, but I've read about it in a secondary source, and apparently the vicar kept a journal and actually wrote about these events. And apparently he wrote that when they reached the deer shed that evening, there was indeed an uncanny stillness in the air around the shed and the tree. There was a coldness in his words. This coldness did not seem of the weather, and a silence that felt expectant. So the little group stood under this tree, and they began to pray together. The vicar led them in prayers. And as they started to pray, a faint light appeared among the branches. And then, as if drawn from the very air, the shadow of a man took form. This man was described as sorrowful, with hollow eyes and the air of someone who was burdened by long-ago grief. So the vicar raised his hand, speaking words of dismissal, telling the figure to go in peace, and the figure seemed to bow its head before fading from view. The Reverend Pratt then performed a short rite of exorcism, invoking rest for the troubled spirit of the departed, and it was said that a sudden wind rushed through the trees as he said these words, scattering the autumn leaves. And then all was still. And after this, no further sightings were recorded, and as far as I'm aware, there have been no sightings of the man up to the present day. So it seemed that the exorcism had worked. But some say that this spot still has an eerie feeling about it, and especially on misty autumn evenings, some say that they can still hear the faint echo of footsteps among the fallen leaves. So, make of this what you will. Now, I've visited this spot many times, and in all honesty, I've never seen anything myself. But I can say that it does have an unusual atmosphere. And I can't say that I would really fancy being alone there after dark, especially on a misty autumn evening. Thanks for listening, and happy Halloween.